Have you ever noticed that the people who constantly chase attention are often the ones who receive the least of it? They reply instantly, always make themselves available, agree with everyone, and spend enormous amounts of energy trying to stay in people's minds. Yet somehow, they are rarely the ones others become deeply attracted to. On the other hand, there are individuals who seem completely different. They don't chase conversations. They don't force connections. They aren't constantly trying to prove their value. Yet people find themselves thinking about them long after they've left. This isn't luck. It's a pattern rooted deep within human psychology. When people hear the phrase ignoring people, they often imagine coldness, arrogance, or emotional games. But genuine attraction has nothing to do with treating others poorly. Real ignoring is much quieter than that. It simply means refusing to make another person's attention the center of your life. It means understanding that your peace, your purpose, and your growth are too valuable to be sacrificed for constant validation. The human mind has an unusual relationship with certainty. When something is always available, always predictable, and always within reach, it gradually loses its emotional intensity. This doesn't happen because people are ungrateful. It happens because the brain naturally adapts to what it expects. The extraordinary slowly becomes ordinary. What once felt exciting begins to feel guaranteed, and once something feels guaranteed, appreciation quietly fades. Imagine walking past a beautiful mountain every single day. During the first few weeks, you would probably stop to admire it. Months later, you might barely notice it at all. The mountain never became less beautiful. Your mind simply became familiar with its presence. Relationships often follow the same invisible rule. Constant availability can make even the most valuable person feel ordinary because there is no longer any sense of rarity attached to their presence. This is why powerful individuals never rush to give away all of their attention. They understand that attention is one of the most valuable things a person possesses. Unlike money, it cannot be recovered once it has been spent. Every conversation, every response, and every emotional investment costs a piece of your time. Those who understand this become intentional about where they place their focus. They don't ignore people out of pride. They simply refuse to give unlimited access to something that should be valuable. Think about two different people. One answers every message within seconds, rearranges their schedule for everyone else, and becomes anxious whenever someone pulls away. Their life slowly begins revolving around other people's reactions. The second person values relationships just as deeply, but they also value their own purpose. They reply when they have the time to be fully present. They protect their routines. They don't abandon important goals simply because someone demands immediate attention. Without trying to create attraction, they quietly communicate something powerful. My life has direction beyond your approval. That message changes everything. People instinctively respect those who respect their own time. They become curious about individuals who are emotionally complete, without constant reassurance. Suddenly, every conversation feels intentional instead of habitual. Every interaction carries more meaning because it isn't driven by desperation or fear of losing someone's interest. There is another psychological reason this works. Whenever emotional space appears, the imagination begins filling it. If you constantly provide every answer, every update, and every moment of your attention, there is very little left for the other person's mind to explore. But when your life isn't constantly on display, curiosity naturally grows. People begin asking themselves questions you never encourage them to ask. They wonder what you're working on, what occupies your thoughts, and why you seem so calm without needing constant recognition. Ironically, the harder someone tries to stay on another person's mind, the easier they become to forget. Endless messages, endless explanations, and endless attempts to be noticed create emotional exhaustion rather than attraction. But someone who values their attention enough to invest it wisely creates the opposite effect. Their presence feels meaningful because it isn't available on demand. The greatest mistake is believing this is about making people chase you. It isn't. The purpose is to stop chasing attention yourself. The moment your focus shifts from seeking validation to building a meaningful life, your energy changes. People don't become interested because you ignored them. They become interested because you finally stopped ignoring your own purpose. And once your attention is no longer controlled by the need to be noticed, your emotional independence begins creating an attraction that cannot be forced. Once you stop making other people's attention the center of your life, something much deeper begins to develop. You no longer wake up wondering who replied to your message, who viewed your profile, or who remembered to check on you. Instead, your attention slowly returns to where it always belonged, your own life. This shift may seem small, but it changes the way people experience your presence. Because one of the most attractive qualities a person can possess is emotional independence. Emotional independence does not mean becoming cold, distant, or refusing to care about others. It means your happiness is no longer controlled by someone else's behavior. You can appreciate people without depending on them to feel complete. You can enjoy companionship without losing yourself in the process. This kind of balance is rare because many people unknowingly build their confidence on external validation rather than inner stability. Think about how people behave when they fear losing someone's attention. They begin checking their phone every few minutes, analyzing every delayed response, and replaying conversations in their mind. They wonder if they said the wrong thing, if they should send another message, or if they need to explain themselves again. What started as a simple connection slowly becomes an emotional struggle. Without realizing it, they stop enjoying the relationship and start managing their anxiety. The problem is not caring about someone. The problem is allowing your emotional state to rise and fall with every action they take. When another person's attention becomes the source of your peace, you hand them a kind of control they never asked for. Every compliment lifts your confidence. Every silence weakens it. Every small change in their behavior feels like a judgment of your worth. Living this way is exhausting because your emotions are constantly being pulled in directions you cannot control. Now compare that to someone who is emotionally grounded. They care deeply, but they don't panic when life becomes quiet. They understand that people have responsibilities, challenges, and priorities beyond any single relationship. They don't assume the worst because someone replies later than expected. They don't chase reassurance every time uncertainty appears. Instead, they remain calm, continue working toward their goals, and trust that meaningful relationships are built through consistency rather than constant attention. This calmness communicates something powerful. It tells people that your confidence comes from within, not from the approval of others. And confidence that is rooted in self-respect feels completely different from confidence that depends on constant praise. One disappears the moment validation fades. The other remains steady regardless of circumstances. Imagine two people meeting someone they genuinely admire. The first immediately rearranges their entire schedule, becomes available at every moment, and slowly begins neglecting their own interests just to stay connected. Their world starts shrinking until it revolves around one person. At first, this may seem like affection, but over time it often creates pressure. The relationship becomes less about sharing life together and more about filling an emotional void. The second person approaches the connection differently. They remain kind, attentive, and respectful, but they continue living a meaningful life outside the relationship. They pursue their goals, protect their routines, spend time with family and friends, and remain committed to their own growth. They are fully capable of enjoying the relationship, yet they are equally capable of standing on their own. This balance creates a quiet sense of security that naturally earns respect. There is another reason emotional independence is attractive. It allows you to respond instead of react. When someone disappoints you, you don't immediately send an emotional message you later regret. When criticism appears, you don't feel compelled to defend yourself at every opportunity. When plans change unexpectedly, you adjust instead of collapsing into frustration. This ability to remain composed during uncertainty reflects maturity, and maturity is something people instinctively trust. Many people mistakenly believe attraction comes from saying the perfect words. In reality, it often comes from managing your emotions when words are unnecessary. A calm response in a difficult moment reveals more about your character than hours of impressive conversation. It shows that your inner world is stable enough to withstand temporary discomfort without losing direction. The greatest freedom arrives when you realize that your peace no longer depends on being chosen, praised, or constantly remembered. You begin appreciating people without fearing their absence, and you start building relationships from a place of strength rather than emotional need. Ironically, this is the moment your presence becomes far more compelling because people are naturally drawn to those who have learned to enjoy connection without becoming dependent on it. And when your happiness is no longer held hostage by someone else's attention, your quiet confidence begins speaking louder than any attempt to impress ever could. Have you ever noticed how silence can be louder than words? Most people assume attraction is created through constant communication. They believe they must always reply immediately, explain every decision, keep every conversation alive, and make sure they are never forgotten. They fear that if they become quiet, people will lose interest. But human psychology often works in the opposite direction. Sometimes the moment you stop filling every empty space with words is the moment people begin hearing your presence more clearly than ever before. The human mind dislikes unfinished stories. It constantly searches for answers, patterns, and meaning. This is why an unanswered question stays in your thoughts longer than one that has already been solved. A movie with an unexpected ending is remembered longer than one that follows a predictable path. The brain naturally returns to what feels incomplete because it wants closure. This same psychological principle quietly influences the way people think about one another. Imagine two individuals. The first explains everything. Every feeling is immediately shared. Every plan is announced before it begins. Every silence is quickly filled with another message, another apology, or another attempt to keep the conversation alive. There is very little left for the imagination because every question already has an answer. Now imagine someone different. They communicate with honesty, but they don't feel pressured to explain every moment of their life. They don't panic when conversations become quiet. They don't send endless messages simply to remain visible. Instead, they allow natural space to exist. That space creates something incredibly powerful. It invites curiosity. Curiosity is one of the strongest emotional forces in human nature. When everything is known, interest slowly fades. But when someone remains emotionally balanced without constantly demanding attention, people begin asking questions on their own. What are they doing? What occupies their time? Why don't they seem anxious about being noticed? These questions appear naturally because silence gives the mind room to think. This doesn't mean becoming mysterious through manipulation or intentionally confusing people. There is an important difference between healthy silence and emotional games. Emotional games are designed to create insecurity. Healthy silence is created because your life is genuinely full of purpose. You become busy building your future instead of constantly managing other people's opinions. The silence isn't calculated. It is simply the natural result of living a meaningful life. Think about an artist creating a masterpiece. Imagine they stop painting every few minutes just to ask everyone around them whether the work looks good. Their attention becomes divided, their confidence weakens, and the quality of the art suffers. Now imagine another artist who quietly focuses on every brushstroke. They disappear into the work itself. Days later, they return with something extraordinary. People admire the result because the artist invested their energy in creating rather than seeking approval. Life works in much the same way. Every unnecessary explanation interrupts your focus. Every desperate attempt to remain on someone's mind pulls your attention away from becoming the kind of person worth remembering. Powerful individuals understand this. They don't rely on constant communication to maintain their value. They rely on the consistency of their character. There is another reason silence creates such a lasting impression. It reveals emotional stability. Many people become uncomfortable the moment a conversation slows down. They immediately assume something is wrong. They rush to fill the silence because they fear losing the connection. But emotionally grounded people remain comfortable even when nothing needs to be said. They understand that genuine relationships do not require nonstop reassurance. Sometimes the strongest connections are built on mutual trust rather than constant conversation. This calmness changes the emotional atmosphere. Instead of creating pressure, it creates peace. Instead of demanding attention, it offers confidence. People begin feeling that your presence is chosen rather than forced. Every conversation carries more meaning because it happens intentionally, not out of fear of being forgotten. Silence also gives others the opportunity to reflect on your value. When you constantly occupy every moment with words, there is little time for people to process how they actually feel about you. But when healthy distance appears, memories begin surfacing. They remember your advice during difficult times. They remember your calmness when everyone else reacted emotionally. They remember how your presence made situations feel easier. These realizations happen naturally because the mind finally has room to think. Ironically, the less you try to control another person's thoughts, the more authentic those thoughts become. Attraction built through pressure is temporary. Attraction born from genuine reflection lasts much longer because it comes from within the other person's own mind, not from your efforts to persuade them. The greatest mistake is believing silence exists to make people chase you. Its true purpose is far more meaningful. Silence allows you to reconnect with your own direction, protect your emotional energy, and stop measuring your worth through constant interaction. And when your attention returns to building yourself, instead of managing everyone else's perception, your presence begins speaking with a confidence that words alone could never achieve. And when people are given the space to discover your value on their own, the respect they develop becomes far deeper than anything that could ever be forced through endless attention. As your emotional independence grows, another important transformation begins to take shape. You stop trying to make everyone happy. You stop feeling guilty for protecting your own peace. You begin realizing that every time you say yes to something that drains your energy, you are quietly saying no to something that could improve your life. This is where true attraction begins to deepen. Not because you are ignoring people, but because you have finally learned to respect your own boundaries. Most people misunderstand boundaries. They think boundaries are walls that push people away. They imagine that setting limits will make them appear rude, selfish, or uncaring. As a result, they spend years saying yes when they want to say no, accepting behavior that makes them uncomfortable, and sacrificing their own priorities simply to avoid disappointing others. They confuse people pleasing with kindness, never realizing that constantly abandoning yourself eventually causes others to value you less, not more. Think about a garden without a fence. Anyone can walk through it. Anyone can damage the flowers, leave behind a mess, or take whatever they want. No matter how beautiful the garden is, it slowly loses its value because nothing protects it. Now imagine another garden with a simple, respectful boundary. Visitors are still welcome, but they understand that the space deserves care. The flowers grow stronger because they are protected. Human relationships work in much the same way. Your time, your attention, and your emotional energy are valuable, but they only remain valuable when you protect them. Many people believe they earn love by becoming endlessly available. They answer every call immediately, cancel important plans for anyone who asks, and place everyone else's needs ahead of their own. At first, this behavior often receives appreciation, but over time, appreciation quietly turns into expectation. People stop asking whether you are available because they assume you always will be. What was once seen as generosity becomes something they no longer notice. Powerful individuals understand that healthy boundaries do not weaken relationships. They strengthen them. They know that respect grows where clarity exists. They are honest about what they can give and equally honest about what they cannot. They don't promise more than they can deliver just to avoid uncomfortable conversations. Instead, they communicate with calm confidence, knowing that protecting their peace allows them to show up more fully in the moments that truly matter. Imagine two coworkers. One accepts every extra responsibility, stays late every evening, and never refuses a request, even when exhausted. Eventually, everyone expects this behavior. The workload continues increasing because no boundary was ever established. The second coworker is equally dedicated, but understands their limits. They contribute fully during working hours, complete their responsibilities with excellence, but respectfully decline commitments that would compromise their well-being or their most important priorities. Over time, this person earns something far more valuable than temporary approval. They earn respect. The same principle applies in friendships and relationships. People often admire those who have direction in life. Someone who protects time for personal growth, family, meaningful work, or quiet reflection sends a powerful message without speaking a single word. They communicate that their life has purpose beyond pleasing everyone around them. That quiet sense of direction naturally creates attraction because purpose is difficult to imitate. There is another reason boundaries make you more attractive. They reveal emotional maturity. Emotionally immature people fear rejection so deeply that they avoid saying no at all costs. Emotionally mature people understand that disappointing someone occasionally is healthier than constantly disappointing themselves. They realize that every meaningful relationship must allow room for honesty. Even when honesty feels uncomfortable, this doesn't mean becoming cold or unavailable. Kindness and boundaries can exist together. In fact, they strengthen one another. When you choose where to invest your energy instead of giving it away without thought, your attention becomes more genuine. Your conversations become more present. Your support becomes more meaningful because it is offered willingly, not out of obligation or fear. People instinctively recognize this difference. They feel the confidence of someone who respects themselves enough to protect what matters. They notice the calmness of a person who doesn't panic when others disagree with their decisions, and they begin trusting someone whose actions consistently reflect their values instead of changing to satisfy every opinion. Ironically, the moment you stop trying to earn everyone's approval is often the moment people begin valuing your presence more. Not because you became distant, but because your time and attention now carry intention instead of availability. You are no longer reacting to every demand placed before you. You are choosing your responses based on purpose rather than pressure. And when people see that your life is guided by self-respect instead of the fear of disappointing others, your quiet confidence becomes far more attractive than endless efforts to be liked. As you become more comfortable protecting your boundaries, something even more powerful begins to happen. You stop living for approval. At first, this change feels uncomfortable because almost everyone has been taught in one way or another, to seek acceptance. From childhood, we are praised for fitting in, rewarded for agreeing with others, and encouraged to avoid disappointing people. Without realizing it, many adults continue living by the same pattern. They shape their words to avoid criticism, hide their true opinions to prevent rejection, and constantly adjust their personality depending on who is standing in front of them. The problem is that people can sense when someone is trying too hard to be liked. It may not be obvious, but human psychology notices emotional dependence in subtle ways. It appears in nervous laughter that isn't genuine. It appears in unnecessary apologies. It appears when someone changes their beliefs every time they meet a different group of people. It appears when a person constantly seeks reassurance that they are accepted. These behaviors rarely create attraction. Instead, they quietly communicate uncertainty. Think about standing in front of a tree during a strong storm. A tree with shallow roots bends wildly with every gust of wind because it has nothing solid holding it in place. But a tree with deep roots may sway, yet it remains standing because its strength comes from beneath the surface. Human confidence follows the same principle. If your self-worth depends on other people's approval, every criticism feels like a storm capable of shaking your identity. But when your confidence is rooted in your values, your discipline, and your character, outside opinions lose the power to control you. Imagine two people entering the same room. The first spends the entire evening trying to impress everyone. They carefully monitor every conversation, agree with every opinion, laugh at every joke, and constantly wonder whether people like them. Although they appear friendly, their energy is driven by one hidden question. Am I being accepted? The second person behaves differently. They are respectful, kind, and open to conversation, but they never pretend to be someone they are not. They don't force themselves into every discussion. They don't compete for attention. They listen more than they speak, and when they do speak, their words reflect what they genuinely believe rather than what they think others want to hear. Without trying to become the center of attention, they naturally draw respect because authenticity carries a quiet confidence that cannot be imitated. There is another reason approval-seeking weakens attraction. It places your emotional future in someone else's hands. If they praise you, you feel confident. If they ignore you, you begin doubting yourself. If they disagree with you, you immediately question your own judgment. This creates an exhausting cycle because your peace is no longer your own. It belongs to whoever happens to be giving or withholding attention that day. Powerful individuals refuse to live this way. They understand that respect cannot grow where self-respect is missing. They know they cannot control whether everyone appreciates them, but they can control whether they remain true to themselves. This realization creates extraordinary freedom. They stop chasing every opportunity to be noticed because they are far more interested in becoming someone they themselves can respect. Ironically, this is the point where people begin noticing them more. Human beings are naturally curious about those who appear comfortable in their own skin. Someone who doesn't constantly seek approval creates an emotional contrast in a world filled with people desperately trying to fit in. Others begin asking themselves questions without realizing it. Why doesn't this person seem affected by criticism? Why aren't they trying to impress everyone? What gives them such calm confidence? Those questions often become the beginning of genuine attraction. Not because the person ignored everyone, but because they refused to abandon themselves for temporary acceptance. Their confidence isn't loud enough to demand attention, yet it is steady enough to quietly earn it. There is also a deeper peace that comes with releasing the need for approval. You stop wasting time explaining every decision. You no longer feel responsible for changing opinions that were never yours to control. You become comfortable with the fact that some people will misunderstand you, disagree with you, or even dislike you, and you continue moving forward anyway. That emotional stability is rare because it is built through self-awareness rather than applause. The most respected people are not those who have convinced everyone to admire them. They are the ones who remained authentic even when authenticity carried a cost. Their actions consistently reflected their principles, and over time, that consistency became impossible to ignore. Respect earned through character lasts far longer than approval earned through performance. And when your identity is no longer built on the opinions of others, your confidence becomes so natural that people are drawn to your presence without ever fully understanding why. The greatest misunderstanding about attraction is believing that it is something you create by controlling other people. Many spend years learning clever phrases, complicated strategies, or psychological tricks, hoping they can make someone think about them more, miss them more, or become emotionally attached. They believe the secret lies in changing another person's behavior. But the truth is much simpler and far more powerful. Real attraction begins the moment you stop trying to control other people and start taking complete responsibility for yourself. Think about how much energy people waste trying to influence someone else's choices. They wonder why a message hasn't been answered. They analyze every conversation, every expression, every word. They constantly ask themselves what they should say next, how they should act, or how they can become more interesting in someone else's eyes. Without realizing it, their entire focus shifts away from their own growth. Their life slowly becomes centered around another person's attention instead of their own purpose. Imagine trying to fill a cup that has a hole in the bottom. No matter how much water you pour into it, it never stays full. Seeking attraction through other people's approval works the same way. Every compliment feels good for a moment. Every sign of attention creates temporary happiness. But because that confidence comes from outside yourself, it quickly disappears, leaving you searching for more. This cycle never ends because external validation can never replace inner confidence. Powerful people understand something different. They know the most attractive quality is not the ability to capture attention. It is the ability to build a life that remains meaningful, even when no one is watching. Instead of asking, "How can I make people notice me?" they ask, "How can I become someone I genuinely respect?" That question changes the direction of their entire life. When your focus shifts inward, your priorities begin changing naturally. Instead of checking your phone every few minutes, you invest your attention in learning new skills. Instead of worrying about who is thinking about you, you think about the person you are becoming. Instead of chasing conversations that lead nowhere, you pursue goals that give your life purpose. Every hour spent improving yourself quietly increases a confidence that cannot be borrowed from anyone else. Think about a sculptor standing before a block of stone. Day after day, they patiently remove small pieces that no one else notices. There is no applause, no audience, no instant reward. Yet with every careful movement, the sculpture becomes more refined. Human character is shaped the same way. Every disciplined choice, every promise you keep to yourself, every difficult habit you develop, slowly creates a stronger version of who you are. These improvements may seem invisible at first, but over time they become impossible to hide. One of the most attractive qualities a person can possess is purpose. People are naturally drawn toward those whose lives have direction. Not because success makes someone valuable, but because purpose creates stability. A person who knows where they are going is less likely to become emotionally lost in every relationship, every opinion, or every temporary disappointment. Their confidence comes from progress rather than praise. There is also something deeply peaceful about no longer trying to control outcomes you were never meant to control. You cannot force someone to understand your heart. You cannot make another person appreciate your value before they are ready to see it. You cannot convince everyone to admire you, agree with you, or remain in your life forever. But you can control your habits. You can control your attitude. You can control the discipline with which you pursue your purpose. And those are the things that shape your future far more than anyone else's opinion ever will. Ironically, this is often the moment attraction appears, not because you were chasing it, but because you stopped making it your destination. People begin noticing your calmness because it isn't dependent on attention. They admire your confidence because it isn't demanding recognition. They respect your discipline because it reflects consistency instead of performance. Your presence becomes memorable because it is supported by substance rather than appearances. In the end, the people who leave the strongest impression are rarely the ones who spent their lives trying to be admired. They are the ones who quietly became the best version of themselves, regardless of who was watching. They invested in their character instead of their image, their purpose instead of their popularity, and their growth instead of their ego. That is why their influence lasts long after the conversation ends. It is built on authenticity, not performance, so never use distance as a weapon, silence as manipulation, or confidence as a disguise. Let every step away from unnecessary attention become a step toward greater wisdom, stronger discipline, and deeper self-respect. Because the moment you stop chasing people and dedicate yourself to becoming a person of real substance, attraction is no longer something you have to seek. It becomes something your character naturally inspires.